Okay, so far we have discussed about one of the example of using digital output port using Arduino, which is by implementation of LED blinking. Now let's continue our discussion with some simple example of using Arduino port as digital input. Of course, in a previous discussion, I already mentioned to you one of the practical example of using digital input or analog input in Arduino is through connecting with sensor, because sensor is the one that can generate current that or generate electrical signal that represent the physical environment, and that generated current will be read by the Arduino. That's why that port which is connected between the Arduino and sensor will become an input port. But of course, that example, okay, means that implementation of sensor is quite complicated. We will discuss that later, but right now let's go for the simple example in order for you to understand that the how actually to operate the port or to sign the port as the digital input. Let's discuss this example, which is the simple digital input example. Okay, in this simple digital input example, we are not using sensor, we are using switch. Okay, switch is one of the example that we can relate with how to use the Arduino port as digital input port. Okay, even in theory, switch does not generate current, but actually it can channeling can channeling the electrical signal from other sources into the Arduino. In this example, we are using the 5-volt signal, which is go from this wire, and ground signal, which is also from the Arduino. We connected with into this switch, and this switch will trigger or will determine whether it will provide 5-volt or ground to this port number 2. Okay, so in other words, it's like this switch will it seems that this switch is generating signal. Which is either a 5-volt, which is this one, or 0-volt, which is this one, to the Arduino input port, where we assign the input port as port number 2 or pin number 2 here. So that is the simplest way to show how to use the port or the pin in Arduino board as the input, digital input. Okay, so don't get confused with that. Okay, switch does not generate the signal, electrical signal by itself, but it's channeling the signal generated by this line. Okay, it can be 5-volt or ground. If you close this connection, it will give 5-volt to the to this pin number 2, but if you open this connection, it will give ground or 0-volt to pin number 2. So it seems like this switch generated the signal. Okay, but what we want to show here is that this pin number 2 will become the digital input of the Arduino. So this circuit is similar. If you simulate in Tinkercad, this is the how it's look like by using the switch, or by using this button. So if you press this button, it will give the 5-volt, which is connected. It will connect between this terminal and this terminal. That's why the 5-volt, this line, this wire will become 5-volt. But if you don't press the button, by default it will provide the 0-volt, which is come from this connection. Okay, so if you see the code there, again, in order for you to set this pin number 2 as input, then you need to use the same function as before, pin mode. So you just execute this one, pin mode port or pin number 2 as input. Of course you can ignore this one first, because currently we set the pin number 13 as output, but we don't use it in this example, in this looping instruction. We don't use pin number 13, so doesn't matter whether this one is execute or not. Okay, you just assume first you don't have this one. Okay, so and then after after the CPU execute this function, and then now your pin number 2 will become an input, digital input port. And then at looping function over here, you can read, okay, you can use this function digital read 2 here is refer to port number 2 here, so meaning that this function will read port number 2 here, atau pin number 2 here, and it will store the result value in this variable called button state. Okay, in general, button state will only have 2 value. It can be 1 or 0. Okay, at the first place, if you read, if this one is if you press the button, this one become 5 volt, which is in this programming it become 1. But if you don't press this button, the ground will go into this port. Then if you execute this function, the button state here will store the value 0. So again, if you want, again, this is 2 things that you need to remember. If you want to use the port as the digital input, you must set the pin mode as the input, and then you select which port you want to set. And after you have set that, then you can use this function to read the whatever signal come from this line. Okay, but of course you must select the port that you want to read. That's why we put 2 there. So after that, then you can use the if else or selective instruction there, instruction there, to check, okay, if my button state equal to high. Okay, if high is also equivalent to 1, so that's why doesn't matter you put high or you put 1, is okay. But in this program, we want to have some user friendly program, so that's why we use the reserved word low and high, so it's more meaningful as compared to you put 1 or 0. So if the button state equal to high, meaning that it have been pressed, then you do something. Of course, in this, at this point, we don't know, we don't know what is the indicator, because we just playing around with the digital input. So that's why if you don't ignore this one, okay, if you don't ignore this one, okay, we just play around with our built-in, because pin number 13 is our built-in LED here. So meaning that if we set the pin mode 13 as output, then this LED will operate, because now pin number 13 is output. So if the button state equal to high, where you means that you are pressing the switch here, where if port number 2, after you read the status of this signal come through this port by applying digital read function, and this button state equal to high at this condition, if button state equal to high, then you turn on the LED, the built-in LED. Okay, then else, if not, meaning that if this button is not pressed, or this generated signal from the switch through this port is 0, then you turn off the LED. So that is where you keep this function will keep looping and keep checking the status of your input, digital input port number 2 here, the status. Okay, each time you, okay, so it will loop forever and check, and whenever there's a changing, it will either turn on the LED or turn off the LED. So now let's stimulate that, so you can see how the digital input, how the we do some operation related to digital input in Arduino. Okay, let's go to the Tinkercad. Okay, before that, I just forget to mention about, okay, about this. Okay, let's go back to the Tinkercad home. Okay, the good thing is about Tinkercad is it's similar to the Arduino IDE. Okay, in Arduino IDE, yes, you can see that it gives you a lot of example. Okay, so you don't have, if you have still new with Arduino, you just can, open any example here to see the code. So same goes to the Tinkercad. Tinkercad have a lot of examples. Okay, Tinkercad a lot of example. You just type Arduino. Okay, you can see there's a lot of examples there, with including the code of that example. For example, in what we have discussed in the slide, there is which is this one. Okay, this one is I taken from the example inside the Tinkercad, which is this one. Yep, this one. Okay, I just drag. So now you have the circuit, and then if you see the code is already there. Click text. Okay, the code is already there, so you don't have to write the code. Let's say if you want to do some to take this one as one of your module inside your project, then you can just take the example and modify by your own. Okay, so you can see that if I press this LED, it will turn off this built-in. If I press this switch button, then it will this LED, built-in LED, which is connected with port number 13, will turn on. That is what we write on and discuss previously, how it's work. Okay, let's see how the simulation is look like. Okay, so nothing's, because now this is 0 volt. So if I press, now the LED is turned on, because now because the switch is channeling this 5 volt into this line. If you unpress the button, now the the switch is channeling this 0 volt from here to here. That's why the LED is turned off. Okay, I think you can also try to prove this by using multimeter if you want. If you're not satisfied with my proof there, okay, you can. Okay, let's try to put multimeter. Okay, then this one you connect to this port, because we want to see the voltage of this line. Okay, this one negative, we go to ground. Okay, if we do some simulation, okay, 0 volt. If I press, it become 5 volt. That's why the LED is turned on, because now when you press, this 5 volt from here is channeling into this line. But if you unpress, this 0 volt is channeling into this line. So the purpose of switch is channeling between these two lines. So 5 volt turn on. If you release, 0 volt, so turn off.